one of the things I love about sports is a great rivalry. And when you watch football, North American football, NFL, you see some great rivalries. It's part of the reason I love the NFL. And teams have a long memory, fans have a long memory about who beat who in which game. And that's what happens when you have a 16 game season and you have one game winner take all in the playoffs, right? But hockey's rivalries can be very, very intense as well. And this year we're going to see some that are broken up and some that are either refreshed or they're brand new. So I'm going to go through 7 that I'm looking forward to this year and 7 I'm going to miss. I'm wearing Boston because they're going to come up 3 times. 3. Because everybody hates Boston except Boston fans. That's basically been my experience the whole time I've watched hockey. It's either you are a Boston fan or you hate the Bruins. There doesn't really seem to be an in-between there. Now, we'll start with the Bruins here in a rivalry I'm looking forward to against the Washington Capitals. Now, in terms of all-time records, Boston has 78 wins, 52 losses, 21 ties, and 12 overtime losses against the Capitals. Capitals fans will say, well, that's great. That's fine. But in the playoffs, let's talk about what happens in the playoffs between Boston and Washington. And yes, in recent history, Washington was able to handle the Boston Bruins. It's going to be interesting to see if without Braden Holtby that changes. And it's going to be very interesting to see during the regular season how these teams respond to one another. Boston, a defending President's Trophy winner who disappointed in the playoffs. The Capitals, who wrote the book on being a disappointing President's Trophy winner. Don't even talk to them about it. And then the Bruins can say, hey, we've done it before too. So this is basically 2 teams that if they win the President's Trophy, don't take them for a Stanley Cup. Look back through the history of the President's Trophy, you're going to see a lot of Boston, a lot of Washington, and a lot of Cup wins when they win that trophy. They also have a Stanley Cup each in the last 10 years. 2011, 2018, and both teams are seen as moving away from that Cup contention. But you have Ovechkin on one side, Pasternak on the other, and two teams that are going to be gunning for maybe the same playoff spot. They might be in the mix. This might be a fight for that last playoff spot in the East. The East is a division of death. So the idea that maybe Boston or Washington could miss the playoffs would be unthinkable in almost any situation, except in the East, where it's possible. So I'm looking forward to that one. Toronto and the Oilers. Toronto leads the all-time matchup between the two, which surprised me. 52 wins, 43 losses, 8 ties, and 1 overtime loss. And it surprises me because of how good the Oilers were during the 80s and how they just ran over the NHL. The Oilers ran up a ton of wins during the 80s to the point where they still have some gaudy records against teams. And again, recent history has changed that, but Toronto does lead the all-time matchups between these teams. I'm looking forward to seeing Toronto and the Oilers get reacquainted. When Toronto was in the West, there were plenty of battles between the Oilers and the Leafs, and there was an exchange of players between Toronto and Edmonton that might be video worthy at some point too. Players that have played for both the Oilers and the Leafs, and there are a lot of them. And so I expect that with Barrie going from Toronto to Edmonton, that might be part of the storyline as well. And these are 2 teams that are trying to prove, hey, we're the best in Canada. We've got the biggest superstar, whether it's Matthews and Tavares on one side, or on the other, you've got McDavid and Draisaitl. This should be a very entertaining rivalry to watch, and I'm here for it. St. Louis and Vegas. St. Louis has never lost in regulation. This comes from the NHL's own website. They are 5-0-0-4, so they have 5 wins and 4 overtime or shootout losses against Vegas. This year, I expect the first regulation loss because they're going to play each other 8 times. If Vegas is unable to defeat St. Louis in regulation over those 8 games, it's going to make it much more difficult for Vegas to win that division. And St. Louis, while they seem to have Vegas's number overall, I think this is going to be a fantastic rivalry. Stanley Cup champions from 2019 against a team that is seen as they should be Stanley Cup champions regularly. That could be one heck of a rivalry. And again, those games, you might want to PVR, get your VCR set up and stick your VHS or Betamax tape in, right? If you got a beta, I don't judge. And record that and show that to people. or even if you have a laser disc, right? Can you record? Can you record? You can't record on a laser disc. Anyways, so yeah, St. Louis 5-0-4 against Vegas should be one heck of a rivalry where Vegas finally puts a regulation loss on St. Louis, and there might be some fisticuffs in that as well. Montreal and Vancouver. This is an old rivalry. It is the thing. Back in the 80s, it was very lopsided. 70s, very lopsided. Honestly, throughout its history, it's been very lopsided. Montreal leads the all-time record against Vancouver. They've won 87, lost 28 in regulation, 13 ties, and 4 overtime or shootout losses. So Vancouver needs to buck that trend. They have that problem with Winnipeg as well, but they already had a rivalry with Winnipeg being in the same conference. Montreal, they only see twice a year. Now they're going to see them 9 or 10 times. These teams aren't going to like each other very much. I would expect that Gallagher and Perry are going to be unpopular with Vancouver fans, and that Roussel and Mott will be unpopular with Montreal fans, and Virtanen may be unpopular with Montreal fans too. This is a team of some agitation on each side, and so I think that's going to be a fun rivalry to see develop. Now, this rivalry's back. I regretted that it was gone. I understand Detroit being in the Eastern Conference. They're in the Eastern time zone. They're not in the same time zone as Chicago. But the all-time record, Detroit leads that all-time record against Chicago. 369 wins, 271 losses, 84 ties, and 15 overtime or shootout losses. Chicago and Detroit belong in the same division. This year we will see it. And this year we will see a battle between two teams, one that seems to be starting its slow climb back up to respectability in Detroit, and one in Chicago that looks like it's kind of a mess. So these games could be fun on a level that maybe this is going to balance out, but they're two original 6 teams. Hopefully they wear their reverse retros against one another, because then you'll have the Hawks in their old one and the Red Wings in what people are calling a practice jersey, but it'll still be a fun game to watch. And I think this could be a good rivalry. And again, you have two teams that are kind of down and out. I would expect there to be some fighting in those games as well. Fighting will be up this year. Teams are playing each other 8 times each, 9 or 10 times in Canada. There's no way that there won't be more dislike and anger between teams. Dallas and Tampa. So this is going to be interesting in that this is your Stanley Cup Finals, and it can't be anything more than a second-round matchup this year. It can't be a Stanley Cup Final again. These teams really didn't like each other by the time that Stanley Cup Final ended, and so this year Dallas has a chance to improve on its regular season record against Tampa. They've led them 25 wins, 15 losses, 3 ties, and 1 overtime loss or shootout loss. But the thing with Tampa is they've had stretches where they've been very good, and they've had stretches where they're miserably bad. And so I think that's going to leave things in favor of Dallas. It's sort of like Detroit's going to have a better record against Chicago, because Chicago had over a decade where they weren't a very good team. When I did the history of the NHL and I went year by year through it, it's surprising just how quickly Chicago became a non-entity in the NHL and for how long they stayed there. So Tampa Bay, great or poor, it's kind of like a Carolina thing they have going on there. But I'm looking forward to the 8 matchups between these teams, even though Dallas will be shorthanded without Sagan and Bishop for at least a couple of those matchups. It's going to be a ton of fun to watch. And LA against Colorado. These teams have been rivals before. These teams have been in the same division before. The Kings do lead the all-time series against Colorado. 72 wins, 52 losses, 8 ties, and 5 overtime losses or shootout losses. That would include their record against the Quebec Nordiques. So Quebec didn't have a great record, so it makes sense that this would be in favor of LA. LA, of course, is on their way up, and Colorado seen as a Stanley Cup contender, potentially Stanley Cup champion this year. So these are seven rivalries I'm looking forward to, and I made sure I didn't use the same team twice. Over here are rivalries we're losing. So for Boston, I've got 2, both original 6 matchups against Montreal and Toronto. Montreal-Boston is always a great game. It's a fantastic game, and the fact that those reverse retros won't be against each other tells you they have to bring them back next year. You have to have the blue Montreal jerseys against the yellow Marigold Boston jerseys. You have to do it. It has to be a thing. That has to happen. And so That's a rivalry that I'm going to miss. That's the rivalry that has caused me to be a disliker of the Montreal Canadiens for decades, and I enjoy it. And then you've got Toronto, who have been a pretty good rival for Boston. And I know people focus on the Game 7s, but they've been hard-fought series between Toronto and Boston. These teams really do not like one another. And I'm going to miss the trolling online from Marchand towards the Leafs as well. I would imagine that would continue on Twitter on some level, but the overall trolling doesn't mean as much when you're not going to face that team during the regular season. So it's a shame. I have Carolina and the Rangers here. This felt like last year it was developing into a good rivalry. The reason being the Rangers handled Carolina during the regular season. Then in the play-in round, Carolina destroyed the Rangers. And so there's a storyline there for the Rangers to come back and try to take them out in the regular season, and then maybe they meet in the playoffs. And these two teams have good, young, exciting rosters, and it's a shame they won't play each other this year. So I think that's going to be a big rivalry in the Metro over the next, I'll say, 5 years. But for this year, of course, it's shelved. St. Louis and Dallas, not in the same division. It is bizarre to me that Dallas is in the same division as Tampa and St. Louis is not. And I know there's still Blues fans that are mad about the way the divisions worked out, even though the scheduling means that the travel won't be as big a deal and they're supposed to change around the start times for games so that St. Louis isn't totally inconvenienced. But it sucks that we're not going to see Dallas against St. Louis. That's one of my favorite matchups for Dallas, even though traditionally St. Louis tends to win the big games in recent years, but it's been fun to watch. So for Dallas, it's a shame they're not going to play St. Louis this year. Well, what can you do? Vegas and Calgary. This was a rivalry that really started to heat up last year to the point where it kind of felt like the Calgary rivalry could eventually push the San Jose rivalry out of the way. This year, Vegas is going to play San Jose 8 times. They will not play Calgary. That will make it difficult for the Calgary rivalry to bump the San Jose one down over the next, I'll say, 2 years, because there's going to be enough hate between Vegas and San Jose out of 8 games this year to at least get us 2 years further down the road. But the matchups between Calgary and Vegas were filthy. They were nasty games. And it is a shame that we won't see them against each other, because it feels like that's a rivalry that's just starting to really kick into gear. And I'll get back into gear next year. And then Vancouver and LA. Why? Vancouver and LA have had a rivalry going back as long as I have watched hockey. So these guys have usually been in the same division, whether it's the Smythe, whatever division it is. And even if they're not, there's been some heated games between them. Keep in mind, a team like that, a t-shirt that was being sold out of the Vancouver store, came from a Drew Doughty comment after losing to Vancouver, getting destroyed by Vancouver, and it became a rallying cry for the Canucks and for the fans. There's a dislike from Vancouver towards LA. I don't know if it's reciprocated, but I know it's there. And no matter where they are in the standings, the games between them can get very heated, and it is too bad that this year Vancouver and LA won't be in the same division. And I was torn on whether or not to say Vancouver and LA or Vancouver and San Jose, but to me, the Vancouver-LA games, there's more history there. There's more playoff history between the two as well. They met in 93. And then, of course, LA took them out in 2012. And then San Jose was 2013. They had them in 2011. I'm trying to think back now. It's like, okay. So, yeah, Vancouver and LA, to me, it's a longer history on a calendar. And multiple calendars. You don't usually get a calendar go. This is a decade. It's really heavy. I can't put it on the wall. So, yeah, Vancouver and LA, it's going to be a shame not to see them against each other. I know. If you make a drinking game out of me saying the word shame in this video, don't. Just don't. Please, for your own safety and health, don't do that. So Tampa Bay and the Islanders, the last one I've got on the board here. So 7-7, because Boston counts as 2 up here. But Tampa Bay and the Islanders, it felt like that playoff series, kind of nasty at points too. And maybe Tampa and the Islanders could have had a rivalry that would have carried over into this regular season, because the Islanders can look themselves in the mirror and say, hey, we pushed the Stanley Cup champions to arguably the best challenge they had in the 4 rounds. And so they would use Tampa Bay this year, I would think, as a measuring stick of, all right, so are we further ahead of where we were last year? And those games could have been intense. And this year, they will not face one another. There you go. So which rivalry are you looking forward to seeing that's brand new this year? So they can't be teams that were in the same division last year. And which ones are you going to miss that now they're not in the same division, so they're not going to play each other? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.